Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The signal of silence. The early morning sunlight streamed through the airport windows, casting long shadows across the bustling terminal. Gate C12 was alive with the familiar mix of travelers, families heading for vacations, business professionals tethered to their devices, and lone wanderers carrying their stories in weathered backpacks. Amid the controlled chaos stood Rebecca Lynn, a sharp-eyed flight attendant prepping for Flight 724, a 4-hour trip from Boston to Dallas. Rebecca had been in the airline industry for over a decade, her experience evident in her seamless balance of professionalism and warmth. At 32, she was known among her colleagues for her ability to navigate high-stress situations with grace. But today, there was an unusual tension in the air. Maybe it was the weather delay, or perhaps just a feeling she couldn't quite shake, a subtle sense that something was slightly off. As the last boarding call echoed through the terminal, Rebecca noticed a teenage girl among the passengers. She was petite, with raven black hair that framed her pale face. Her movements were hesitant, her posture guarded. Walking closely behind her was a man who appeared to be in his late 40s, sharply dressed in a tailored suit that seemed at odds with his overly casual demeanor. His grip on the girl's upper arm was firm, almost too firm, and Rebecca's sharp intuition prickled. Uncle and niece, the man had said earlier to the gate agent when questioned about their relationship. He carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who knew how to blend in. Rebecca had seen hundreds of passengers like him before, wealthy, aloof, but nothing overtly suspicious. Yet, as the pair walked past her to board the aircraft, the girl's fleeting glance at Rebecca stopped her in her tracks. There was something in her eyes, fear, pleading, a quiet desperation. Rebecca filed the interaction in the back of her mind as she began her pre-flight checks. She moved methodically through the cabin, greeting passengers and stowing luggage with practiced efficiency. In the middle of the plane, in seat 12A, the girl sat rigidly, her gaze fixed on her lap. The man was beside her in 12B, leaning back with the easy air of someone in control. Across the aisle in 12C was an elderly woman with kind eyes, absorbed in her crossword puzzle. Rebecca didn't let her unease linger. After all, she had a job to do, and instincts, while valuable, weren't always evidence of something tangible. Still, she couldn't ignore the quiet storm building in the back of her mind. The girl in 12A. Emily Song sat frozen in her seat, her hands gripping the edges of the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. At 17, Emily was no stranger to fear, but this was different. This was a paralyzing dread that made every muscle in her body ache. She could hear the man beside her, his calm voice masking the menace behind his words as he gave subtle instructions about how to behave. "Don't forget," he murmured under his breath, his lips barely moving. "One wrong move, and there will be consequences." Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had to stay quiet, to endure, to survive. It had been 2 weeks since her life had turned into this waking nightmare. 2 weeks since the man who called himself Robert had approached her at a coffee shop, pretending to be an old friend of her father. He had spoken kindly at first, offering to help her family with their financial struggles. But his intentions had quickly turned sinister. Now, trapped at 30,000 feet, Emily felt utterly helpless. She had tried to send signals, subtle gestures that might alert someone, anyone, to her predicament. But Robert was always watching, always one step ahead. A spark of suspicion. As the plane leveled off, Rebecca began her first beverage service, pushing the cart slowly down the aisle. She stopped at row 12, her practiced smile firmly in place. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her tone light. Robert glanced up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. "Just water for me," he said smoothly, then gestured toward Emily. "And for her, a ginger ale." Rebecca nodded, handing him the water and setting the ginger ale on Emily's tray table. For a brief moment, Emily's trembling hand reached out, and as she took the drink, she curled her thumb into her palm and closed her fingers over it. The movement was quick, almost imperceptible, but Rebecca caught it. Her heart skipped a beat. The signal was unmistakable. It was a gesture she had learned about in a recent human trafficking awareness seminar, a silent call for help. Rebecca kept her expression neutral, masking the adrenaline surge coursing through her veins. She offered a warm smile before continuing down the aisle, but her mind raced. Was she overreacting? Could the girl have made the gesture accidentally? Rebecca didn't think so. Her years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts. Something wasn't right. The first step. In the galley at the back of the plane, Rebecca paused to collect her thoughts. She replayed the interaction in her mind, trying to determine her next move. Her training had emphasized the importance of discretion in such situations. If she confronted the man outright, she could put Emily in greater danger. Rebecca knew she needed more information. She discreetly approached her colleague, Max, who was preparing snacks for the cabin. "Hey, Max," she said in a low voice. "Can you cover for me at the front for a bit? I need to check something in the back." Max raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. "Sure, no problem." Rebecca made her way to the rear of the plane, where she accessed the crew's communication system. She sent a coded message to the cockpit, alerting the captain to a potential security concern in row 12. The message was deliberately vague to avoid alarming the passengers or tipping off the suspect. Returning to the galley, Rebecca began formulating a plan. She couldn't act alone, but she also couldn't ignore the silent plea she had seen. The girl needed help, and Rebecca was determined to ensure she got it. The stage was set. Rebecca's instincts had been triggered, and now, it was a matter of timing, strategy, and courage. As the plane soared through the clouds, the lives of everyone on board were about to be irrevocably changed. The web of deception. The plane hummed with the quiet buzz of passengers settling into the monotony of the flight. Some were watching movies, others flipping through magazines, while a few had already succumbed to sleep. Rebecca Lynn, however, was anything but relaxed. Her heart thudded in her chest as she returned to the galley, every nerve on edge. She'd just seen something that couldn't be ignored, a clear, deliberate signal for help from the girl in 12A. Rebecca leaned against the counter, forcing herself to take a slow breath. Panic wouldn't help now, she needed to think. She quickly reviewed her training. Observe. Gather information. Alert the captain. Act when it's safe. Her first step was to observe more closely. Rebecca needed to confirm her suspicion before escalating the situation. She grabbed a tray of water bottles and made her way back to row 12, her eyes carefully scanning the scene as she approached. Behind the smile, Robert leaned back in his seat, exuding confidence. He had mastered the art of blending in, of appearing ordinary. Years of practice had taught him that the key to avoiding suspicion was to be unremarkable. No one questioned a well-dressed man with a polite demeanor. No one suspected a family member traveling with his niece. But today, something felt different. The flight attendant had lingered a moment too long when serving their drinks. Her eyes had briefly met Emily's, and Robert hadn't missed the slight tension in her expression. He turned his head subtly, catching a glimpse of Rebecca as she approached with the water tray. His mind raced, calculating the odds. Was she just being attentive, or had she seen something? He couldn't afford to take chances. "Emily," he said softly, his tone laced with menace. "Remember what I told you. Behave." Emily nodded stiffly, her hands trembling as they rested on her lap. She didn't dare look up, terrified of what Robert might do if he suspected she'd tried to signal for help. Rebecca stopped beside them, offering her warm, practiced smile. "Would either of you like some water?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Robert smiled back, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "No, thank you. We're all set." Rebecca nodded, but her focus was on Emily. The girl's hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. Rebecca noted the slight tremor in her shoulders, the way she seemed to shrink into her seat. She moved on, but her concern deepened. A teacher's instinct. Across the aisle in 12C, Margaret Hayes, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s, had been watching the pair in row 12 with growing unease. Years of teaching had given her a keen ability to read body language, and something about the dynamic between the man and the girl didn't sit right with her. Margaret had first noticed the man's grip on the girl's arm during boarding. It wasn't the protective grasp of a caring relative, it was controlling, almost possessive. And the girl's body language? That told a story of it. Own. She looked trapped, afraid to speak or move without permission. Margaret shifted in her seat, her gaze lingering on the girl. She debated whether to say something, but the man's demeanor gave her pause. He was sharp, calculating. If she made a misstep, she could make things worse for the girl. When the flight attendant stopped by with water, Margaret saw her chance. She waited until Rebecca was within earshot and then spoke up, her voice low. "Excuse me, miss. Could I have a moment of your time?" Rebecca looked over, her smile never faltering. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be right with you." Margaret nodded, glancing toward the girl once more. She would wait for the right moment. A silent message. Back in the galley, Rebecca finally had a moment to breathe. Margaret had shared her concerns in a hushed tone, confirming Rebecca's suspicions. The older woman had noticed the same things Rebecca had, the girl's fear, the man's controlling behavior. Rebecca thanked Margaret for her vigilance and reassured her that the situation was being monitored. She then discreetly relayed the details to the captain through the secure communication system. Captain Hartley, a calm and seasoned pilot, responded quickly, acknowledging the potential threat. He promised to notify the authorities to meet the plane upon landing, but there were still 2 hours left in the flight. Anything could happen in that time. Rebecca needed to keep things from escalating. The turning point. As Rebecca returned to the cabin, she formulated a plan. She couldn't directly confront Robert without risking Emily's safety, but she could try to create an opportunity for Emily to speak freely. Rebecca knew that if she could separate the pair, even for a moment, it might make all the difference. She approached Robert and Emily's row again, this time carrying a tray of snacks. "Sir, would you mind stepping to the back with me for a moment? We're conducting a quick customer service survey, and we'd love your feedback." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "A survey? Mid-flight?" Rebecca smiled brightly, her tone light. "We like to use the quieter periods of the flight to gather feedback. It only takes a couple of minutes." Robert hesitated, his instincts on high alert. But refusing might draw more attention than agreeing. After a moment, he gave a curt nod. "Fine." He stood, giving Emily a pointed look before following Rebecca to the back of the plane. A glimmer of hope. The moment Robert was out of earshot, Rebecca returned to Emily's seat. She crouched down beside her, speaking softly. "Emily," she said, her voice gentle. "My name is Rebecca. I saw the signal you made earlier. Are you in danger?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, her body shaking as she nodded. "Okay," Rebecca said, her voice firm but soothing. "You're not alone. We're going to help you. Stay calm and follow my lead, okay?" Emily nodded again, her relief palpable. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Back in control. When Robert returned to his seat, he noticed an immediate change in Emily. She looked slightly less tense, her breathing more even. His eyes darted to Rebecca, who was now serving snacks to other passengers, her expression unreadable. Something was happening, and Robert knew it. The walls were closing in. But Rebecca wasn't done yet. With every step, she was preparing to expose Robert for what he truly was, and to ensure Emily would never have to endure his control again. The clock was ticking, and the showdown was just beginning. The storm brews. The cabin hummed with the steady rhythm of a mid-flight cruise, but Rebecca Lynn's mind raced with possibilities. She had confirmed her suspicions, Emily was in danger, and Robert was the threat. Yet, she couldn't act impulsively. One wrong move could put the girl in even greater jeopardy. Returning to the galley, Rebecca discreetly updated Captain Hartley about Emily's silent confirmation. The captain reiterated that law enforcement would be waiting at the Dallas airport, but Rebecca wasn't convinced they could afford to wait. She had seen the calculating look in Robert's eyes. He was on edge, and desperate people could be unpredictable. As Rebecca mulled over her next steps, Max joined her in the galley. "You've been tense all flight," he said, his voice low. "What's going on?" Rebecca hesitated before deciding to confide in him. "We've got a potential human trafficking case in row 12, she whispered. "The girl signaled for help, and she confirmed she's in danger. But we need to keep this under control until we land." Max's eyes widened, but he nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me keep an eye on them," Rebecca said. "If he tries to move her, if he acts suspicious, I need to know immediately." Max agreed, his expression serious. They both knew the stakes. Emily's silent fight. In her seat, Emily felt the walls closing in. She had taken a monumental risk in signaling for help, but Robert wasn't a man easily fooled. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her every movement. "Is there something you want to tell me, Emily?" Robert asked, his voice low and menacing. Emily froze. She shook her head, her hair falling in front of her face like a shield. "Good," he said, leaning closer. "Because if I sense anything out of the ordinary, you know what will happen." Her stomach churned at the unspoken threat. Robert had shown her what he was capable of in the past, and she had no doubt he'd follow through. She tightened her grip on the armrest, silently praying for the strength to hold on. The unexpected ally. Across the aisle, Margaret Hayes had been keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Her years as a teacher had taught her to recognize when a child was in distress, and Emily's every movement screamed of fear. Margaret had also noticed Rebecca's increased presence around row 12 and the tension between the man and the girl. Margaret leaned toward Rebecca as she passed by. "I don't know what your plan is, but if you need an extra pair of hands, I'm here," she whispered. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "Stay alert," she said softly. "If something happens, don't put yourself in danger, but let me know immediately." Margaret gave a slight nod, her eyes determined. She might have been retired, but she wasn't about to sit by and do nothing. A crack in the facade. As the flight continued, Robert began to grow restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that the flight attendant had seen too much. Every time she passed by, her eyes seemed to linger just a second too long. His control over the situation was slipping, and he hated it. He decided to test the waters. Turning to Emily, he said, "I need to use the restroom." "Don't move." Emily nodded, her heart pounding as he rose from his seat and walked toward the back of the plane. Rebecca noticed immediately. She signaled Max to follow Robert discreetly while she made her way to Emily's seat. Kneeling beside her, Rebecca whispered, "This might be our chance. Can you walk to the back with me?" Emily hesitated, her fear palpable. "He'll know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not if we're careful," Rebecca said gently. "We'll be quick." Emily nodded, her trust in Rebecca outweighing her fear. A tense encounter. At the back of the plane, Max pretended to restock the galley as he kept an eye on Robert, who was leaning against the lavatory door, his phone in hand. Max noted the way Robert scanned the cabin, his eyes sharp and predatory. "Something I can help you with, sir?" Max asked, his tone polite but firm. Robert gave him a thin smile. "Just waiting my turn." Max nodded but didn't move away. His presence was deliberate, a subtle way of letting Robert know he was being watched. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Emily made their way toward the rear, Rebecca shielding the girl as much as possible from the rest of the cabin. Emily's steps were tentative, but Rebecca kept a reassuring hand on her arm. When they reached the galley, Rebecca positioned herself between Emily and Robert, her body a protective barrier. She handed Emily a bottle of water and spoke softly. "You're doing great. Just stay calm." Robert's eyes locked on them the moment they appeared. His expression darkened, and he started toward them, his movements deliberate. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice cold. Rebecca turned, her smile unwavering. Not at all. Just making sure all our passengers are comfortable. Robert's jaw tightened. She's fine. Let's go, Emily. Rebecca's mind raced. She needed to buy time. Actually, sir, we've noticed she seems a bit unwell. Perhaps some air in the galley might help. I said she's fine, Robert snapped, his voice rising slightly. The tension in the air was palpable. Passengers nearby turned to look, their curiosity piqued by the sudden exchange. Margaret, sitting nearby, saw her opportunity. She stood up, her voice calm but firm. Excuse me, young man, but the girl doesn't look fine to me. Maybe you should let her rest for a moment. Robert turned to glare at her, his composure cracking. Stay out of it, he hissed. The sudden escalation drew the attention of other passengers. Max stepped forward, his stance protective. Sir, I need you to lower your voice and step back. Robert realized, too late, that he was cornered. His carefully crafted facade was crumbling, and now, all eyes were on him. The breaking point. In the cockpit, Captain Hartley received an urgent update from Rebecca. The situation was deteriorating, and he decided it was time to act. He contacted air traffic control, requesting an expedited landing and law enforcement to be prepared for immediate action upon arrival. Back in the cabin, Rebecca maintained her calm exterior, but her heart raced. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Robert was unraveling, and she needed to keep him from doing something drastic. Sir, Rebecca said firmly, I need you to return to your seat. Authorities will meet the plane when we land. Robert's eyes darted around, assessing his options. He grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her close. She's coming with me, he snarled. The entire cabin froze. Passengers gasped, some rising from their seats, but Max stepped forward, his voice steady. Let her go, now. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, as if realizing he had no escape, Robert released Emily and raised his hands. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Rebecca quickly ushered Emily to the galley, shielding her from view as Max and other passengers ensured Robert didn't make another move. The descent. As the plane began its descent, the tension remained thick, but there was also a sense of relief. Emily was safe for the moment, and Robert was under constant watch. Rebecca stayed with Emily, holding her hand and whispering words of reassurance. You're brave, Rebecca said softly. We're almost there. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe that she might actually be free. The plane touched down with a jolt, and within moments, law enforcement swarmed aboard. Robert was taken into custody without incident, his expression cold and defiant. Emily was gently escorted off the plane, her nightmare finally over. Rebecca watched from the jet bridge as Emily was taken into the care of social workers. She felt a wave of exhaustion and relief wash over her. The girl had been saved, but Rebecca knew the fight against human trafficking was far from over. She straightened her shoulders, knowing she'd do it all over again if she had to. Sometimes, a single act of courage could change everything. A new dawn. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles painted the tarmac as Rebecca stepped off the plane. The crisp night air hit her face, a stark contrast to the stifling tension of the last few hours. Emily stood a short distance away, wrapped in a blanket provided by the social workers. Her eyes darted nervously around, but there was a flicker of something new, hope. Rebecca watched as the authorities led Robert away in handcuffs. His once composed demeanor had crumbled, replaced by barely concealed rage. His voice, a low snarl, echoed across the tarmac. You'll regret this. You don't know who you're dealing with. Rebecca didn't flinch. She'd heard empty threats before. Her focus remained on Emily. The girl was safe now, and that was all that mattered. The aftermath. Inside the airport, Rebecca sat with Emily in a quiet, private lounge while waiting for the FBI agents assigned to the case. A kind social worker named Monica knelt in front of Emily, speaking softly. You're incredibly brave, Emily, Monica said, her voice warm. Do you feel okay to tell us a little more about what happened? Emily hesitated, clutching the blanket tighter. Her eyes flickered to Rebecca, who smiled reassuringly. It's okay, Emily. Take your time, Rebecca said. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she began to speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He took me from my hometown a few months ago. Said if I didn't listen, he'd hurt my family. I didn't know what to do. Monica placed a gentle hand on Emily's knee. You're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore. Emily nodded, but the fear in her eyes hadn't entirely faded. Trauma lingered like a shadow, and Rebecca knew Emily's journey toward healing was just beginning. A reunion of kindness. Rebecca left Emily in Monica's care and stepped out into the bustling terminal. The adrenaline of the past hours had finally worn off, leaving her drained. She spotted Max waiting near a coffee kiosk, holding 2 cups. Figured you could use this, Max said, handing her one. Thanks, Rebecca replied, grateful for the warmth of the cup in her hands. Max sipped his coffee and leaned against the counter. So, did they say what's next for her? Rebecca nodded. The FBI will investigate further, and she'll likely be placed in a safe house for now. Monica said they'll help her reconnect with her family once it's safe. Max exhaled deeply. It's hard to believe how close she came to slipping through the cracks. Rebecca looked at him, her expression thoughtful. That's why we can't ignore the signs. I almost second-guessed myself back there. What if I hadn't acted? Max placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. But you did. And because of that, she has a chance at a future. An unexpected call. As Rebecca and Max prepared to board their next flight, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled her to answer. Hello? Hi, is this Rebecca? A voice asked. It was Monica, the social worker. Yes, this is Rebecca. Is everything okay? Monica hesitated, then said, I thought you'd like to know. Emily wanted to say something before she left with the agents. She said, please tell the flight attendant thank you. She saved my life. Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you for telling me that, she said softly. She's going to be okay, Monica added. It'll take time, but she's a fighter. And it's because of people like you that she has a chance. Rebecca ended the call, her heart heavy but full. She turned to Max, who raised an eyebrow. Good news? He asked. Rebecca nodded, a small smile forming. The best kind. Ripples of change. A week later, Rebecca found herself standing in front of a group of flight attendants at a training seminar. Her supervisor had asked her to share her story to emphasize the importance of recognizing and acting on signs of trafficking. As she recounted the events of the flight, she saw the impact her words had on the room. You don't need to be a hero to make a difference, Rebecca said, her voice steady. You just need to be aware, to trust your instincts, and to act when the moment comes. The room erupted into applause as she concluded. Rebecca felt a wave of pride, not for herself, but for the team effort that had saved Emily. A letter of gratitude. Months later, Rebecca received an envelope at work. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper. Dear Rebecca. I don't know if you'll remember me, but I'm the girl you helped on the plane. My name is Emily, and I wanted to thank you for saving me. I'm living with my aunt and uncle now, and I'm starting school again. It's hard sometimes, but I'm learning to feel safe. The day I made that signal, I thought no one would notice. But you did. You changed my life. I hope someday I can do something as important as what you did for me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for caring. Love, Emily. Rebecca read the letter twice, tears blurring her vision. She carefully folded it and placed it in her bag, knowing it was something she would treasure forever. A mission renewed. Rebecca continued her work as a flight attendant, but her perspective had shifted. Every flight became an opportunity, not just to serve passengers, but to stay vigilant, to watch for signs that others might miss. Her experience with Emily had shown her that sometimes, the smallest actions could have the greatest impact. As she walked through the terminal on her way to another flight, Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't change the whole world, but she could change the world for someone. And that was enough. Sometimes, saving a life